Welcome to the Selling Show, where we unpack, repack, and break down exactly how CEOs, founders, and senior executives sell their ideas, point of view, and personal brand to the people who matter most. This is your host, David Newman, and you are in the right place if you want to build market eminence, amplify your influence, and attract high-value prospects, investors, partners, talent, and media opportunities with less chasing and more confidence. Let's go. Well, my friends, welcome. We are going to talk today about leadership. We're going to talk about legacy, and we're going to talk about your leadership legacy, combining those concepts. And my amazing guest is Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch, known as Oak to his friends and maybe his podcast listeners.
That's
so,
right.
Oak, welcome to the show.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, David. Like I said before the show, since we spoke a couple weeks ago, I've really been looking forward to this show.
We have so much to cover, and I want to jump right into it. Tell us a little bit about your professional journey and your backstory that led you to the work that you're doing today, and what were some interesting pit stops along the way?
Yeah, so did 23 years active duty in the Army, was a combat arms officer. So I started off an infantry officer, did my first 5 years in the infantry, and then I switched over to Armor Cav, and I was an Armor Cav officer for my last 18 years. Did a lot of speaking when I wasn't deployed. I deployed first Gulf War, Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Did a little bit of time in Bosnia and 9 months in Kosovo, and did some disaster relief operations, Hurricane Hugo in Charleston, Hurricane Andrew down here in Florida and Miami. But I did a lot of teaching when I wasn't deployed, when I wasn't attached to a deployable unit. I did a lot of teaching. I taught at a couple of schoolhouses. I taught at our staff college, the Australian Command and General Staff College. And then my last assignment on active duty, I ran an Army ROTC program at the University of South Alabama in Mobile. So I was helping to create that next generation of leaders, not only for the Army, but for the nation. And that's really where I got to the point where I knew this is what I wanted to do, to talk about leadership to people, because I didn't have a recruiting officer. So I did all the recruiting myself for my program. And I was going around speaking to high school students and college students, and really developed at that point my love, my passion for talking about leadership to young men and women. And now it's to everybody, anybody who want. I always say, if you want to be a leader, if you are a leader or you ever aspire to be a leader, then I want to talk to you.
Well, let's start there, actually, because in the entrepreneurial world, typically most professional services, consulting, speaking, training businesses start out as the founder. And when you talk to some people, they say, "Oh, Oak, I would never want to hire people. I would never want to hire a team. I did not get into this business to be a leader. I don't want to lead people. It's not my gift. It's not my skill set." Now, they may have never led anybody, and they're thinking, "Oh, I used to work for a boss. I saw what she was doing and what he was doing, and I did not want to do that. I did not want to do that." When you hear that, I'm curious, what little flags go up in your mind? What has this person's misconceptions or perhaps negative experiences around leadership, what bad messaging has gotten through to that person who says, "Oh, you know what? I did not get into this to be a leader, not my cup of tea"?
Yeah, I hear that quite often. And one of the best things from my book and from my talk, I've actually had people come up after reading my book or after hearing my leadership talk, and they've told me, they said, "I didn't think I was a leader until I read your book or I heard you speak, and now I realize I'm doing those things that are making me a leader." And it's sad because people are influenced by their past. And we've all had those bad leaders who kind of sour us on that. And we think that's what leadership is about. And it's not. The thing I always try to tell people that tell me that is, I said, look, if you're a good leader, first of all, it will be the hardest thing that you've ever done and the most rewarding thing that you've ever done if you do it right. If you don't do it right, go do something else, please. But if you do it right, it's going to be the hardest thing you ever did, and it's going to be the most rewarding thing you ever did, because you as a leader get to make a difference in people's lives.
Yeah.
And I try to end every one of my leadership talks, ended my book with that same thing, that as a leader, you are going to make a difference in somebody's life every day.
Yeah.
Why not make a conscious decision to make a positive difference in somebody's life every day? And that's the benefit of being the leader. You actually get to decide those things. And if you're a good servant leader, then you're taking care of people, not only at work, but helping to I hope, also helping to make them a better person. Because I think that's part of the job of a good leader as well.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I thought a moment ago when you said it is the hardest, if you do it right, it is the hardest thing you will ever do. If you do it wrong, it's going to be twice as hard.
Yeah. And it's going to be harder on the people that you actually have the privilege to lead. And it is a privilege to be the leader.
Yes.
And I think too many leaders today have forgotten that it is a privilege.
Well, I know that in the early part of your book, you do something which is very wise and very necessary. And a lot of leadership books do not do this. You give us the definition of what leadership really is and what it's all about and what it does and what it means. Could you share with us what your definition of leadership is all about?
Yeah, very simple for me. And I think I came about that definition because I had some good servant leaders, both in high school and in the Army. And for me, it's very simple. I had my hand in commissioning over 600 lieutenants over my career in the Army and as a Department of the Army civilian. And I used to tell every single one of them, look, leadership is not about you, and yet it's all about you. And I'd always get somebody who'd come up and say, well, Colonel McCulloch, how can it not be about me and all about me? And I said, it's not about you and the title you get or the privileges you get or that you're going to get more pay and get to live in a nicer house or drive a nicer car. Okay, leaders get those things. Oh, fine, good. As long as that's not the only reason you wanted to be the leader. If that's the only reason you want to be a leader, then again, go do something else because you're never going to be a good one. It is all about you and how you treat and empower the people that you have the privilege to lead and the organization that you have the privilege to lead. And look, I understand you got to make money as a businessman. I'm not stupid. If you don't make money, you're not going to survive. But what I always told the people who would tell me that I want to make, I want my business to be successful. I want to get my next promotion. I want to get my next pay raise. I'd say, if you do this servant leadership right, and you treat and empower the people that you have the privilege to lead, they're going to want to come to work and do good things, which is going to make your organization better. And it's also, you get credit for it because you're the leader. You get credit for it, whether it's good or bad. You should get 100% credit for it.
Yeah.
But you did it for the right reasons, not because you were greedy or selfish, but because you were helping other people become better workers and better people. And in the end, it's going to work out for you, I promise.
It's so funny what you've mentioned this a couple of times, and I completely agree with you that it's about the person that you are or the person that you become. Where do you see or how do you see that intersection of personal development and professional development? How do those intersect?
Yeah, so I think as the leader, again, but even as a person, I think you have to do this. But certainly as a leader, one of the main jobs of a leader is to build the culture of that organization. And I always tell people that vision, plan, and culture have to be connected, because if they're disconnected, you got problems.
Yeah.
And when I talk about culture, I talk about value. Most good culture, organizations that have a good culture, that culture is value based, whether it's faith values or whatever value it is that you bring to the table. And that's what I tell people when they're starting to build a culture is go back to who you are, your values. And I think that's so important because you can have a vision of where you want that organization to be or where you want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But if you're not happy with who you or that organization is when you get there, what benefit was that? Because the vision is where you want to be. The plan is how you're going to get there. And the culture is who you are along that route from where you are today to where you want to be.
Hold on. This one is so good, even I'm taking notes. Listen, are you a CEO, founder, or corporate executive ready to fix your market obscurity problem and gain the market eminence you know you and your company deserve? Cool. Book your private Market Eminence Roadmap call with me, and let's see what might be possible for you. The link is simple. doitmarketing.com/call. See you over there. Now, I got to get back to taking more notes. I'm just going to dive in. I want to talk about chapter 3, and we'll take a lot of the points from our conversation from your fantastic book. But a leader is comfortable being in charge. That's the title of chapter 3. I'm guessing that with newer leaders or freshly promoted leaders, there's a big element of imposter syndrome. Yeah. So who am I to be a leader? I don't have any secret sauce. I don't have, and maybe these are the people that have had amazing leadership role models. Right. And now they're trying to operate in the shadow of those legendary leaders that came before them. How do you solve or how do you address some of that imposter syndrome that new leaders get?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've all been there, that first leadership position or that after that first promotion or whatever, we've all been in that situation. And I always tell people the same thing. Number one, be yourself. You can't be the leader somebody else is. And what works for them may not work for you. You got to be yourself and figure out what works for you as a leader. And number two, you don't have all the answers, and that's okay. I learned that I was a 24-year-old lieutenant, took over my first platoon. And my platoon sergeant, I remember him like he was yesterday. Then it was Sergeant First Class Pinson. He was about 6'5", about 250-pound country boy from Mississippi. And the very first day, he grabs me by the shoulder and says, "Sir, pick up an MRE. Let's go have lunch." And we went underneath a tree and we're sitting there having lunch. And he said to me, "Look, sir, you're the lieutenant. You're in charge." He said, however you want to do things, we will do them that way. He said, "However, I've been in the Army for 23 years. He'd been in the Army almost as long as I'd been alive. Why would you not listen to somebody like that?" Yeah. But that's because leaders, even young leaders, sometimes get that ego. They let their ego get out of whack. Look, we all have an ego, and we want people to have egos because that's what drives people to be successful. That's what drives them to be the best at whatever it is they do. But good leaders know when to put that ego aside and say, okay, I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the knowledge. I don't have all the skills. Let me tap into these people that I have the privilege to lead to use some of their knowledge, skills, and abilities. And if you do that, if you be yourself and you understand you don't have all the answers and it's okay to ask questions, you're going to do okay.
I'm curious, the next section of the book is about a leader communicates. And I'm guessing that this is one of the key principles, but I'll ask. A lot of people hear the word communicate and they think, okay, Oak, I got to be eloquent. I got to talk. I got to command the room. What role does listening play? Listening before you ever even open your mouth.
Yeah, listening is a huge part of the communication, and we don't do a good job of it as people, but certainly as leaders. I think, one of the things I always say is communication is a two-way street. It isn't just you telling people as a leader what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, and you should never do that. But it's also you listening to the people who have more experience than you, or even somebody who doesn't. I had a boss who retired, a 4-star general, and he used to tell me, Oak, a good idea is a good idea, whether it comes from a private, the lowest ranking person in your organization, or a general, the highest ranking. And a bad idea is a bad idea, whether it comes from a private or a general. He said, and you are the leader. You are under no obligation to use any of those ideas. It's up to you to figure out what the good ideas are that you can put into use that's going to help you accomplish whatever it is you have to accomplish at that time.
Yeah.
But listen to them, because they might have the right answer. You never know.
When it comes to communicating, people will probably look at someone like you, very composed, very direct, very clear, very confident, and they say, well, I took my personality assessment, right? Let's say they took a DISC assessment, right?
Right.
So there's the dominant, the influential, the social, and then the compliant, or the calculating. And they say, well, I'm not a high D. I'm not an alpha dog. I'm not one of these people that walks into a room, takes charge, starts telling people what to do. I'm more of the person that's off on the side of the room, listening, taking the temperature of people around me, or I'm very analytical. I'm sure a lot of the science and technical leaders that you work with have this problem. I'm all about the numbers, Oak. I'm all about the math. I'm all about the straight lines and coloring within those lines.
Yeah.
How are different communication styles factored in to what we call a quote unquote great leader?
Yeah, I think the key is that however you communicate, you have to be able to communicate. It is what leaders do. If you can't communicate in some way, you can't be a good leader. I'm sorry. However, there are different ways to do that. Just like there's different ways to learn. People learn different ways. Some people are visual, some people are hands-on, some people just want to hear what they need to learn. So you got to figure out that piece for you as a communicator. What is my strength? And if something isn't your strength, then again, turn to your team and figure out who a good partner is that can help you with those things, both help teach you how to be better at it, and also be able to clarify things if need be. And I think that's the key to being a good communicator, is concise, succinct, and easily understood. If those three things happen, then you're going to be a good communicator, no matter what style you communicate in or what method you use.
Yeah.
If clear, concise, and easily understood, then you're on the right track.
Yes. It's funny. I will sometimes get this feedback, not about leadership, but either about speaking or podcasting, and people, they resist, and they'll say something like, well, David, I'm not like you. I'm not big. I don't have this big, bold personality. I don't have this big enthusiasm. And I said, well, hang on. Take away the words big. Take away the words bold. If they don't like me, they'll say loud. Take away the word loud. What's the other word that you said? Enthusiasm. So you have enthusiasm for leadership.
That's your choice.
And that can take 1,000 different forms.
Yeah.
Right? There's people who are very introverted and very quiet, very analytical, but they're very enthusiastic about leading their team. There are people who are a little bit more sociable, less bold, less loud. They don't take up a lot of oxygen in the room. And those are the magnetic people that draw people into a conversation. They don't need to blast out the way I might blast out with my big personality or my big voice. So when you look at a role model, I think it's less important to say, well, am I like that person? Am I big? Am I bold? Am I loud? No, you don't have to be. Yeah. How do you express your enthusiasm when you're excited about your kids, when you're excited about your vacation, when you're excited about your dog, right? How do you express that enthusiasm being yourself? Do you feel that you have to kind of do a little bit of deprogramming before people can fully step into their leadership authenticity?
Well, I think so, because again, they've had experiences of leaders generally. Even somebody, a young man or a young woman just coming out of high school, they had teachers who they looked up to or disliked because of their leadership style, how they did things. And I certainly did. I had two outstanding role models in high school, but I also had a couple that I was like, yeah, I don't ever want to do that. And I think we've all been in that situation. You know, the hair on the back of your neck stands up and you're like, yeah, I'm not doing that ever if I'm in a leadership position. But I think, you know, instead of describing those type of things, what kind of outward personality or traits that you have, I go back to, and I tell young men and women, the thing you should be looking at, am I getting results? Because leaders get results. You know, in the real world, results matter. And so you gotta, that's what the focus has to be. Take care of people, get results. If you do that, even if you're quiet, some of the best leaders I've ever had I never heard them raise their voice one time.
Yeah.
You know, never. And I tried to do that. I failed a couple times. I can count on probably one hand the number of times I yelled at people that I was in charge of, but I have done it. And I counted that as a failure in my leadership ability, that I had to do that or order them to do something instead of asking them to do something. But get results and take care of people. That's what it is. And I think that going back to your question, I think a lot of leaders have had the bad influence, the bad example that they think leaders are like. And I call that vicious circle. You know, you get a bad leader who drives out the good talent, because people are going to leave. If you're not a good leader, the good people are going to leave.
That's right.
And then, so who stays? Your average or below average people stay. And they look at you as that person as the example. So when they move up the line, because they're the ones who get promoted because they stayed, then they become the bad leader who drives out the next group of good young leaders.
Yeah.
So it's that vicious circle to just keep going around and around and around. And if you don't break that circle, your organization is in trouble.
Well, I'd like to change gears, and because it's not every day that I get to talk to a seasoned lieutenant colonel, U.S. Army. I know that one of your areas of study is global conflict, future of warfare, and as we're talking, there are two big conflicts that the U.S. is kind of spectating at this point and somewhat involved in. One is Israel-Gaza. The other is Ukraine-Russia. Tell us a little bit, just from the military perspective, lessons learned. Is there an outcome that you see militarily or otherwise that, you know, the average layperson just sees these crazy headlines and these crazy developments, and they have no geopolitical or military context for understanding what's going on? What are your thoughts, or what are you telling your audiences when they're curious about what's happening in the world today, in either one of those fronts or both?
Yeah, so I'm a huge believer, like General Powell, you know, and who's still the most impressive man I've ever met in person by far. And I was lucky enough to meet him when I was a senior first lieutenant. You know, his philosophy that you got to have an endpoint. You got to know what outcome you want and a method to get there, and then get out. And I don't think we've done a very good job of that lately, in the last 20 years for sure. We've stayed longer than we absolutely should have stayed, which then causes more problems than if you hadn't even gone at all, I think. At least that's what the results have been. So I think, you know, when you're looking at those conflicts, then you got to have the negotiation piece from the United States, because let's face it, I mean, if you're going to fight a war, you want America on your side, because we are the big dogs on the block, at least for right now. So the person who's negotiating with those sides that are at war, you got to try to make it so that everybody wins, and that's probably never going to happen. But you got to get as close to that as possible. And I know when I was in Kosovo, and I was negotiating between the Serbs and the Albanians, and then throw in the Roma, the Gypsies, which both sides hated. You know, trying to get to a point where everybody was happy with what we were trying to do. And I always say, look, anytime you're in that situation where you're negotiating between two two sides. Start with what is in common: family, security, put a roof over my family's head. At our kids, start with what you got in common and then work your way out. Because if you start out here with what's different and try to work in, you're never going to get there. And I learned that really quickly during my negotiating time in Kosovo. I started that way. And then after about 3 or 4 meetings, I was like, okay, that's not working. So let's start with what we've got in common and we'll work out. And we came to some pretty good conclusions that and compromises that I think helped the majority of the people in the area.
It's, I mean, no matter what, it's a tough nut to crack. And, hopefully we're not going to get any further involved because that's like you said, you see these protracted situations with no end game in sight. It's lose-lose across the board.
Yeah, nobody wins from that.
Nobody wins from that. Tell me a little bit about teaching and learning, because I know that one of your core philosophies is an excellent leader is teaching and training, and an excellent leader is also themselves always learning, right? Never complacent, never arrogant, never thinks that they know it all. How do those two, the teaching and learning, intersect? And talk a little bit about each.
Yeah, so a good leader is a mentor. And I always tell people, you got to be a mentor and have a mentor. I don't care how high up in the organization you get, you still need a mentor. And, I said that at a conference with a bunch of executives, and somebody in the back row said, well, I'm at the top of my organization. There's nobody above me to be a mentor to me. And I said, really? I said, look around this room. The mentor doesn't have to be in your organization. And in fact, they don't even have to be in your profession. And I encourage people to have mentors who are outside of your profession, because everybody in your profession is looking at things like this. They've all been trained the same way. They've all had the same type of jobs. They've grown up in probably pretty close to the same culture. Your creativity isn't happening there. Ask somebody outside your profession to take a look at the same thing you're looking at, and you'll get some good ideas. So I think you got to be a mentor, do the coach, teach, mentor, develop young leaders, because we are all going to, I don't care what organization you're leading, you are going to leave it at some point, one way or another. You're either going to retire, you're going to get fired, you're going to quit and move to another organization, or you're going to die. But one way or another, you are leaving that organization. And if you don't put the time in to develop that next generation of leaders, then shame on you. We deserve everything we get because that is our responsibility as leaders. Personal development, and it is personal. You have it's on you. Good if your organization, your company, whatever you're in, has a professional and leadership development program, and there aren't a whole lot of them out there anymore. But good if they do and benefit from that. But you got to take it on yourself to do your own reading, to do your own development, to make it personal. I mean, personal development. Make it personal. You can't wait on somebody else to develop you. You have to take some of that on your own, and then take advantage of whatever else is out there, a good mentor. And if you don't have a mentor, go find one. I promise you there's somebody out there who would love to be your mentor. But you got to mentor people, you got to have a mentor, and you have to take some ownership of your own personal and leadership development program.
Yes. Well, and I'm imagining part of your self-development could simply be reading books, listening to podcasts, going to conferences in your industry, or taking even a leadership role.
Absolutely. You know, when I go to a conference as the keynote speaker, I have my notebook right here. I have my notebook that I take along. I'm a firm believer in that as a leader, you should have a leadership journal where you write down quotes that you've read. You write down decisions that you made and the outcome. You write down those type of things. But when I go, I sit in on the breakout sessions, and I'm sitting there taking notes. And I actually had somebody one day, I hadn't spoken yet, so they didn't know that I was the keynote speaker. And I'm sitting there taking notes. And after my talk, this guy that I sat in on his breakout session, he comes up and he says, well, you were the keynote speaker. Why were you taking notes in my class? And I said, because I can learn from you just like you can learn from me. If you ever get to the point where you think you can't learn anymore, you're in trouble.
Holy smokes, so much value in this episode. Listen, if you are loving what you're hearing, feel free to download, subscribe, tell a friend, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to The Selling Show. Now, back to the interview. I always say, Oak, that the true master is always the student.
Absolutely.
The moment you think you're done, you're done.
Absolutely. You can always learn something new. You can always get a little bit better. And I talk about reflection because that's how we learn from experience. You don't learn from the experience very little because that's full of emotion. You got to take that step back and reflect on it. And that's what good leaders have to do. Reflect on those things to get better. And even if you were good at it, even if you did a good job, that doesn't mean you still can't get better at it. I had a good friend who was a college football coach, and he said, Oak, I treat defeat and victory the exact same way. I try to figure out how to get better. And that makes a lot of sense. I don't care how good you are, you can always get better.
Absolutely. Well, and speaking of good, another thing that you and I talked about before in our earlier chat is your book, which came out in 2021. It has done so incredibly well. The title of the book, and we'll put this in the show notes also, is Your Leadership Legacy, Becoming the Leader You Were Meant to Be. Came out in 2021, and in a fairly short period of time, you've got 210 Amazon reviews. That's 210 with an overall score of 4.8 across the board, 4.8 out of 5. And you told me privately that you never asked a single reader for a review ever.
No.
And it just took on a life of its own.
Yeah, I never ever asked anybody to do a review. When they told me they were reading it and they said, I'm thinking about doing a review, I said, I'd love to have you do a review, but I never went out looking for reviews.
Yeah. Tell me about your publishing journey. What was that like to write the book? What was your process?
Yeah.
Give us the behind the scenes.
Yeah. So I always, for many years, I thought I wanted to write this book and I just never got around to it. And then one day, my wife and I and her mom, who lived in the building here, same building we live in this condo, and two other people who live in the building, we went to a motivational / how do we revitalize the Catholic Church little one-day conference. And there was a great speaker there. And if you've never heard him speak and you ever get a chance, you need to. Jonathan Fanning, great speaker. And he would speak for 45 minutes and then we'd take about a 15-minute break and there was music and some different stuff. And then he'd speak for another 45 and he did that 3 different times. And every time he took a break, I went up and picked his brain because he was doing what I wanted to do. He was speaking publicly to people about motivation and being better and all those kinds of things. So he gave me some great tips that I still use today. At the end of it, after he was done, we said our goodbyes and thank yous, and he started to walk away. And he turned around and he said, Oak, if you've written a book. And I said, well, no, Jonathan, I'm thinking about it, but I haven't written it yet. And he said, stop thinking about it and write it. And so I went home that night and I wrote out the table of contents. That was the 15th of February, 2020. Started writing it on the 16th of February, 2020. And I published it on the 12th of February, 2021. So just under a year from when I started to when I published it. And, probably like everybody who writes a book, I'd be laying in bed at night and something would flash in my head that I wanted to put in the book. And I thought, well, I'll get to that tomorrow. And you wake up and it's gone. So what I started doing was I went to my computer and I put a blank page for every chapter that I was thinking about writing. And then when that would happen, I'd get up, come in and just write a sentence or two and then go back to bed. And then the next morning, at least that was enough to jog my memory of what I wanted to talk about. And then I would expand on that. And that really helped me a lot. And today with computers, you can cut and paste and move things around. When we were kids and you use typewriters, that wasn't possible. But in today's world, it's too easy. So that really helped me. And I didn't finish a whole chapter. Sometimes I didn't even finish a whole chapter before I moved on to the next one, because something came to me, a conversation or some epiphany that I said, yep, I got to write that chapter right now. And I think the first chapter was the last chapter I actually finished.
Oh, interesting. How about that? So it's like editing a movie, that different parts just come into completion at different times.
Yeah. And then how did the, I wanted to make sure that the first chapter kind of tied it all together. And I had bits and pieces of it written throughout, but I didn't complete it till I had already completed the rest of the book.
Yeah, really amazing. And tell us a little bit about, so now I'm really curious, because you said that Jonathan just whispered a couple of things on the breaks, some of which you're still using today.
Yeah.
What were some of those gold nuggets?
Network. Talk to people. He said, even if you don't know, even if you think that it's not worth your time, you never know. So I never turned down a chance to talk to people on a phone call or Zoom meeting. If they connect with me on LinkedIn and they want to have a meeting, if I can make it happen, I do, because you never know. And I've done that, and I actually had somebody take me up on it. And then the very first thing when we popped up on the screen, he said, "So what do you want from me?" And I said, "I don't want anything from you." I said, "I'm just trying to make connections here." I said, "If somewhere down the road I can help you or you can help me, then good for both of us. But I'm just trying to make connections here and maybe learn something from you."
Sure.
So
isn't that funny? It's like when you used to walk into a cigar store, and again, we're totally dating ourselves, but that's okay.
Yeah, I know.
You walk into a cigar store and you're all happy and you're cheerful and you say, "Good morning" to the proprietor. And the first thing out of that person's mouth, "What are you selling?"
Yeah.
"What are you selling?" It's like, "Nothing. I'm just being cheerful."
Yeah. So that was the first thing that he told me was, make connections.
Always network. Yeah.
Never turn down a chance to make connections. And then he said, utilize every tool that you have in the box. He said, use your keynote talks, use your book, use your social media, start doing podcasts, be a guest on podcasts. He said, because you only have so many ways to reach people. He said, try to maximize all four of those ways to reach people. And so that's what I try to do.
That's incredible. And as far as booking speaking, you and I chatted about this a little bit. How do conferences and associations find you? How do you find them?
Right. So some of it I find on, the internet. Just I look up for conferences of certain types, or people looking for leadership speakers to talk. Some of them, I've actually gotten a few speaking engagements off podcasts. Somebody's watched a podcast that I did. They liked kind of what I was talking about, and they reached out to me and hired me. And then, of course, you always get those word of mouth. I did a speaking engagement for the Washington Fire Chiefs Association,
right?
And somebody liked it. So 2 weeks later, I got a call from the Oregon Fire Chiefs Association. That person had talked to somebody who then talked to somebody, and they reached out to me to talk.
Yeah.
And then that led to the Police Chiefs Association in Oregon. So word of mouth is absolutely something that you can't underestimate how important that is. And then some of them I've just connected on LinkedIn with people.
Yeah.
And found out that, that they do something. They have some hand in or know somebody who puts together the conferences for their association or their organization. And they introduced me to somebody who then decided they wanted me to come speak.
Really, really great. Amazing. So I've got two final questions here as we're landing the plane. The final question is, how can people get connected and stay connected to you? But before we get there, if folks were to take one overarching leadership concept from our conversation today, what would you hope that big takeaway idea should be?
lead with integrity and set the example. And I think those two, in my opinion, those go hand in hand, because leadership is about people and trust. End of story, period. That's what leadership is. People and trust. If you can get people to trust you, you can lead any organization. I don't care what it is. And I kind of proved that when I retired. I was a combat arms officer in the Army for 23 years. When I retired from the Army, I ran a food bank for 2 years. You don't get any different than that. That's a 180-degree difference. But I understood it was about people and trust, and I had to earn their trust. And the only way you're going to earn people's trust is through integrity, setting the example, your care, being a person of good character. That's how you're going to earn the trust of people. So be a person of integrity and earn trust. I think if you do that, I think you'll be well on your way.
So good. So good. Well, where can listeners get connected and stay connected to more Oak McCulloch brilliance? Where can we send people? What links should be in the show notes?
Yeah. So, I have a website, www.ltcoakmcculloch.com. And on that website, it has links to all my social media that I'm on. It has my cell phone number and my email address. So if you want to reach out to me to either just talk and pick my brain and just get to know each other a little bit, I'm happy to do that. Or if you would like what you heard today and would like to at least discuss me coming to speak at an organization or at your company, then reach out to me. I'd be happy to do that. But absolutely connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the main social media that I use.
Yeah.
And that's how we met. And it connect with me there. I try to always, if somebody new connects with me, I reach out to them immediately, trying to get see if they want to connect further. If they do, great. If they don't, that's fine too.
Right.
It's got to be a two-way street.
Absolutely. And just, insider tip, folks, if you do connect with Oak, mention that you heard him on The Selling Show, and he might still talk to you. He might still talk to you, even though you heard him right here. So all of those links to the book, to the website, to Oak's LinkedIn, all the good stuff will be linked up with hyperlinks you can click on in the show notes right below this episode at thesellingshow.com. Oak McCulloch, you are amazing. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, David. This has been a great conversation.
And that wraps up another episode of The Selling Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, tell a friend, go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thesellingshow.com. See you next time.